Good evening, I'm Dr. Glenda Cooper. Hello and welcome to Up and Coming Stories. We're delighted that you could join us on this unprecedented evening. Tonight, it's all about hearing stories which have never been told in public before. You are going to be the first to hear them. It's also a chance to see some of the different ways that our city students have looked at storytelling and the creative ways they've responded in lockdown. For those of you who are city students, I hope this is a flavour of some of the things we can do here. For those of you who are journalists or academics or friends or families, this is a chance to see what our graduates have achieved. So, are you really there? At the moment, we can't see you, but we would like to hear you. So, just for a moment, prove that you are really there and we're not talking to ourselves. Could we start with a small ripple of applause just to get things going? Can we hear you? Brilliant. Thank you. Now, your mic should be muted again. Make sure your videos are off. And like a real theatre, please don't look at your phone. We have 5 fascinating stories tonight, from space to the NHS, from compassionate fashion to surviving abuse. Some are told by the journalists themselves, others have been dramatised with the help of a professional actor. In one, we have the actual interviewee taking part again. None of them let good drama get in the way of the facts. Each will run, followed by a brief Q&A, and then we're looking forward to meeting you and chatting further in the virtual news cafe afterwards. So let's start with the ways you can interact tonight if you want to. Obviously, applause and cheering at the end of each piece is always welcome. You can write comments and chats in the chat box below. There'll also be some opinion polls at some point. We hope you'll stay with us afterwards in the virtual news cafe. The drinks will be on you, I'm afraid, but you can meet the cast and crew and chat with them directly. And after the show, you can carry on the conversation through our website or on social media. Look for @NewsOnStage1. One more thing, we're recording this show, so please be aware that by taking part, you've consented to being recorded. Please don't try and record it yourselves due to copyright issues. We may release some or all of the video at a later date, but the main thing is you are here with us to hear some up and coming stories. So let's begin. For our first story this evening, appropriately enough, we are beyond the bounds of everyday life. Come and join us to find out about space law and how it is used. Tonight's first speaker is transporting us back to 1997, where an out-of-this-world encounter tests this law and addresses the wider issue of space junk and its unknown but very significant impact on our lives. So joining us from her virtual legal classroom is Helen Tezjanler to help us explore the black hole in space law.
Good morning, class. I'm Professor Helen Tezjanler, and this is Introduction to Re-entry of Orbital Debris 101, or as I prefer to call it, the black hole in space law. Now, to our first case study of the term, the Tulsa target. Can anyone tell us the facts? No one? Day one and you're all unprepared. Fine, I'll spoon feed your freshman brains just this once, okay? So 22nd of January 1997, a woman, Lottie Williams, is walking through a park in Tulsa, Oklahoma. It's very early in the morning and she's with her friends. She then notices, like in all great apocalyptic movies, a huge ball of fire across the sky. Now she knows from just common sense it's not the usual suspects like rain or snow or flying fish. Can anyone hazard a guess as to what it was? A shooting star, maybe? Well, unfortunately, no. Maybe the apocalypse? Well, thankfully, no. Good-looking alien superhero, perhaps? Well, lawyers such as yourselves should know that such things don't exist. It was, in fact, a 6-inch piece of metal from a disintegrating rocket, which had deorbited and hit Lottie on the shoulder just 30 minutes after she saw the fireball. According to NASA, the makings of the debris were consistent with the materials of a second-stage Delta rocket, which had deorbited after circling the Earth for months. We all know that Delta rockets are the great expendables of the rocket family, so this isn't really surprising. This incident, though, although beautifully random and inexplicable at the time, was historical. It made Lottie Williams the only person in the world to have been hit by space debris. Or so it would seem. If you look at page 49 of your textbooks, you'll see that NASA calculates at least one catalogue piece of space debris falls to Earth every single day. That's been the case ever since we started exploring space 60 years ago with Sputnik. So the likelihood of Lottie being the only case is very, very unlikely. Paragraph 12, subsection 4, shows a statement from NASA back in 2011, calculating that the likelihood of getting hit by a piece of space debris and injured was 1 in 3,200. For you ratio junkies taking my class, you're more likely to get hit by lightning. Now, I want you to switch on your brains for some maths. Current data shows that there's 7.8 billion people on Earth. And if we apply NASA's ratio to the current population, that means there are over 2 million of us on Earth that could be hit by space debris and injured at any given time. Now, you should already all know what the rudimentary numbers and stats of what's surrounding our planet tattooed on your brains. But if for some reason you need a refresher, there are 34,000 objects that are over 10 centimeters currently orbiting Earth. And there are another 900,000 more orbiting pieces between 1 centimeter and 10 centimeters wide. My conclusion in all of this is that there are, and there'll be many more cases like Lottie's. Perhaps one of the main reasons we know of her case in the first place is because of her reaching out to the media. Otherwise, would we have all known? Current and future space explorations, as well as the continued direct or indirect placing of space junk within our orbit, will only increase this likelihood, and no one may be able to tell how disastrous the effects may be until the impact is imminent. Now, I know it may be hard to fathom, but young lawyers such as yourselves are not untouchable. Lottie could have been any one of us, and although the orbiting space debris is often tracked, anticipating where it will land is another case entirely. It's similar to dropping a coin into a fish tank and trying to anticipate where that would land. So, what case can we make here? This is our client, right? And the actus reus here was... Please keep up, everyone. Every lawyer, even the intellectual property group down the hall, knows this. Actus reus is a guilty act. And in Lottie's case, the actus reus was that she was hit. And we know by whom, or at least who manufactured the whom. So where's the justice for Lottie? And that is where our class really begins. Your performance so far leaves a lot to be desired, though. Back to the case. We have the foundations here, don't we? So the process should be fairly simple, right? Unlike my fellow professors, not naming specific names, would have you believe, space law is not like regular law and its conventional workings. In many ways, it is like rocket science. But that's why we're here. We're not doing it because it's easy. We're doing it because it's hard. To understand the facts of the case, we need to look back a bit, back to 1966, when the Outer Space Treaty was negotiated and signed by the US, the UK, and Russia. As of June 2020, there are now 110 countries that are part of this treaty. If I've said it once, I'll say it again. This is the Bible of space law, everybody. Eat it, breathe it, don't forget it. It provides the basics of international rules and regulations that govern space activities. Its main point, space is free for everyone, anywhere, anytime, equally. My favourite part of this treaty is the Liability Convention, and it states the following: that a launching state will have to pay, absolutely no doubt about it. They would have to pay compensation towards anything damaged by their space objects on Earth, as well as objects around Earth, like aircraft, for example. Can anyone see Lottie here? Another resounding no? Fine, I'll help you out again then. It's this statement right here. In one of the rudimentary treaties of space law, it clearly states that compensation for Lottie is applicable. So what's the problem here? What are we missing? By looking at this statement alone, we can see two big question marks, both here and here. Let's tackle the first one, a launching state. What does that even mean? Quite unhelpfully, it can mean a few things simultaneously. A launching state is defined in the glossaries of your textbooks as the state that has procured the launch or the state that has actually launched the satellite, which in Lottie's case, we know it was a US satellite, right? But wait, read a little further. The following definition states that a launching state could be the state that owns the facility from which the rocket was launched. So depending on where it was launched or who owned the facility can determine who we approach to compensate Lottie. And by not knowing this basic fact, it can make the qualities of our case as well as the compensation process very, very complex. And there's another problem too. If you've been paying attention, technically speaking, there was no damage. Thankfully, Lottie wasn't hurt, but there was no way for NASA nor the launching state to have known what the consequences would have been. As I mentioned earlier, you can refer to lecture capture in your notes. Arguably, this could have been seen as irresponsibility, right? A lack of regard towards Lottie. What it also shows is a lack of mens rea for the launching state. And if you need to dust off your Latin after the summer, mens rea means intention of wrongdoing. And in Lottie's case, there was no intention to harm or damage her. Something that I find truly fascinating, and it's really the crux of our lectures this term, is that regardless of the damage caused or not caused to Lottie, under international law, there are no enforcement mechanisms. None. And the guidelines outlined are not legally binding. Why, you may ask? Because that would go against the principal idea of freedom within the Outer Space Treaty. In the France versus Russia space espionage case 2 years ago, you can refer to page 63 of your textbooks for references. We can see the most that parties can do is name and shame, and this in itself may highlight the faults of the launching state or the guilty party, and it might bring media attention to it. But in terms of justice, it doesn't amount to much at all. So, what does this all mean for Lottie? Well, is it justice or compensation? No. A story? Absolutely. A case study of where space law needs to be changed or amended? Congratulations. Now you're thinking like space lawyers.
Thank you, Helen. Well, I'm glad that I know now what to do if I'm hit by an asteroid, or at least who to hire. So if you have a question for Helen, or if indeed you've had a near miss with space matter yourselves that you've been waiting to share, please type it in the chat. So I've heard from Mel Bunce that she thinks she's had enough to worry about this week before learning about falling space debris. Helen, how did you find out all about this stuff about space law and just how common it is?
I actually studied space debris and in turn space law for my dissertation project, which I finished for my graduation. And it was quite an organic idea, actually. It came about by looking at the consequences of littering on Earth, the fines that you'd have, and obviously the warnings about polluting the ocean. But we never think really about what we're littering in our orbit, do we?
So how do you find out who would, Raphael has asked, how do you even find out who's responsible for the falling debris?
Well, there are several avenues you can explore this, and obviously NASA's the expert, but similar to Lottie's case, the materials that the debris, if it actually makes it to Earth, because some debris does burn up upon re-entry, can determine where it came from. So certain metals or elements used within that piece of debris can link back to a piece of a rocket, for example. But Raphael is right in the sense of usually you can't tell.
And that's going to be a sort of an ongoing problem, I think. Thanks so much for those questions. Currently, Helen hosts the Professional Insider podcast and works as a blogger and journalist. You can find her website and Twitter handle on the chat. Now, still to come, why aren't we all wearing trainers made of apples or lingerie made of seaweed? But for now, can we please give a big hand to Helen? Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Okay, so the second of our pieces brings us back nearer to home. It's written by Sarah Hack, and it's based on a long-form feature she wrote where she followed an NHS radiographer around for a 12-hour night shift from patient to patient and from prawn jalfrezi to double espresso. This has been recreated into a dramatic monologue, which will be performed by the actor Natalie Pereira. When the sun sets, healthcare workers on the night shift take to A&Es across the country. This is the story of a radiographer, accustomed to being seen, but rarely noticed. She's freshly qualified, with horn-rimmed glasses and slacks, and the hem of her hijab tucks neatly under her collared tunic. There's a dose badge clipped to her lime green NHS lanyard to monitor radiation.
A big part of why I love my job is because radiographers aren't seen. Patients are only in for about 5 to 10 minutes. No one talks about radiographers. So the first case I'll show you tonight is a mobile. This means we have to haul a portable X-ray machine to the ward for a patient because they can't make it down to our rooms. We've got a brand new Samsung model with Wi-Fi and an obnoxious startup jingle. Now, all X-rays have to be justified. That means we have to have good grounds to validate firing radiation directly at someone's body. So X-rays, they have to be meticulously done. We're up here on the 3rd floor, ward B12. Everyone's switching shifts in a choreographed wave of flushed, weary commotion. You can always distinguish day staff from the night staff because of their choice of hot beverage, milky tea or black espresso. Here's patient J, who needs to be manoeuvred to his position. I slide the imaging plate behind his back and shout out to the nurses, "X-ray, save your ovaries!" The nurses squeal and scatter. I tell them later I'm joking, mostly. It's 9:15 p.m. Back downstairs. "Hi there, A&E X-ray, what's the name?" One of my colleagues is going up to CT. So I'm now the only radiographer down here. We don't have a CT computed tomography scanner on this floor. Really annoying, unusual for a hospital. Ideally, you'd want one in an A&E department. I spot another colleague still here, working an hour after her shift has ended. "Please, go home," I say. There's quite a lot of that. It's 10:17 p.m. Radiologists are known amongst healthcare workers for their argumentative nature. It's sparked by shopping lists, doctors asking for a series of X-rays when they aren't at all necessary. For doctors, it's just another test, but it's radiation. We're the guardians of radiation. That's us. And if something goes wrong, if something happens, it's always on us, because it's like, if you go to the pharmacy and the doctor gives the wrong prescription, you expect the pharmacist to check. The same way for us. If it goes to court, we're liable. Now, this is how I do an X-ray. I start with some brisk niceties, confirm their identity. I'll raise my voice an octave and sweeten it if they're elderly or disoriented. Then I pull the heavy overhead machinery down and click it into place. Careful positioning for that picture-perfect X-ray. That means removing jewellery, bras and boxes. "Here we go," I say. "Take a deep breath for me, please. Hold it there. Breathe away, all done." It's 11:19 p.m. Walk past the night shift porter. He tells us about his interest in fantasy harem books and his chosen drag queen name. It's Veronica. At midnight, a man with blood pouring down his face peers through the rectangular window in the office wall. "You all right, darling?" he asked casually. He got mugged on a night out and reckons his nose is broken. He wants to know if it has been. Well, I have to say, I can't confirm or deny it. It's the doctors, not the radiographers, who tell us what they see in the x-rays. But the patients always ask us. I add, "You'll feel better if you don't have dried blood all over your face." 12:42 a.m. Now it's a 7-minute walk over to neonatal unit. NICU, don't complain about your feet aching from all the standing. We're out in the cold night air, but I'll lend you a fleece. You got lucky with the shift. Yesterday was crazy jumping around. We're here to x-ray twin babies. The call came in earlier, but I warned them that I'd be a couple of hours, as I was the only radiographer available. But there's a hitch. The twins aren't showing up on the portable. Give me a pen. I use its thin metal clip to unscrew a panel on the side of the machine and to rejig it. No use. You know why this is happening? I logged the request over half an hour ago, but the machine only displays results for today, and it's past midnight. We need to go back to the office, process it again, and trudge back. 2:05 a.m. We slump the break room. It's a narrow sliver of space tucked into the back of the office. 2 small faded sofas. Here's my meal, a tub of prawn jalfrezi and rice and water in a gifted Love Island water bottle. I've had a persistent cough for days. Oh, don't worry, it's not corona. I've got a chest infection. But here in the hospital, we build an immunity. 3:33 a.m. The NHS, it's on the brink. We do have a great shortage, but it's not that tangible. I mean, it feels like it's just the state of the place you work, and then you realise it's not just here, it's like this everywhere. But privatisation has crept through the cracks. Private clinics have been renting out the NHS theatres and paying the assigned workers private rate pay. A week ago, I found myself on the rota list and earned £450 before tax and on a single shift, roughly 3 times my regular salary. 5:17 a.m. The night shift is a separate time zone. You'll find the automatic doors take 18 seconds to peel open. The computer's stuck on Windows 98 glitch at least twice during startup. The stream of patients has dried up. I flick through my notebook, which contains the names of patients I like to keep a track of. To be honest, most of my mental energy is exerted trying to decipher my own handwriting. I'm quite relieved to know that they're alive. A colleague calls in sick for the day shift. With no one set to be on call, there will only be one available radiographer and they're going to struggle. 7 a.m. It's the last scan. The patient is an elderly man, bedridden in A&E. His children have been crowding around his bed. The image of his lungs is cloudy and grey. Cancer. This is very, very bad. He's going to die soon. I send the image along to the doctors and Alicia Keys sings New York on the radio. It's a hospital. We carry on. At a certain age, I thought I'd go private. But right now it's like, the more I work, the more I think, no. If I'm going to break my back for anything, I'd rather it be the NHS.
Thank you to Natalie for performing that piece, and welcome to her and to Sarah, the author of the original piece, I think is here. Please type your comments and questions for them in the chat box. I suppose what I should ask Sarah is like, sort of what really struck you about shadowing a night shift? You obviously followed a radiographer around for 12 years, for 12 hours. It may have seemed like 12 years.
So Natalie does a fantastic job at bringing me back to the moment, like war flashbacks. I think it was a range of things. It's the way that she carried herself, she moved on, the way that she interacted with these patients. She only saw them for like 30 seconds to 5 minutes, and yet she was so kind and empathetic, and they all left like thanking her for her time. And it felt like these moments when people are so vulnerable because they're in a hospital and they don't know what's going on with them. It was just so nice to see the NHS do what it does and just help.
And Natalie, did that sort of sense, do you think, come across to you as you prepared for the role, the kind of the character of the radiographer you were creating? I think you might be on mute.
It was just lovely to have an insight into the life of our NHS workers, especially during this time, during the pandemic. And yeah, I think when I was preparing, it's the main thing of just, we have to move on. We have to turn up. I've got a cough, but I'm here. I have to just keep going. And I think that just makes you really, really grateful for what we have.
Thank you very much. I just want to tell you a bit about both Sarah and Natalie. Sarah Hack describes herself as a freelance journalist and professional pessimist. She's also the creator of the groundbreaking Millennial Report on Instagram. Do check that out. Natalie trained at RADA and Central, and as well as her screen work, has been working with the acclaimed theatre companies Tamasha and Yellow Earth. So that, we've been talking about the life of a radiographer, but later in the show, one of our journalists will be asking about what you would do if you had to make life and death decisions in the NHS. Are you ready for that? But for now, let's say thank you to Natalie and Sarah. Thank you, Natalie and Sarah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay. For our next piece, we have a slightly unusual piece here. First, I have to give you a warning. This is a tale that concerns child abuse. There will be no explicit details given of that abuse, but for those for whom this may be a triggering subject, this piece talks to an interviewee who survived this and how he rebuilt his life. For his final project at City, Pablo Iglesias decided to look into the subject of how child abuse is treated in this country. As part of this project, he met Tim Verity, who told him about his experience. We're very lucky to reunite Pablo and Tim over the internet, as Pablo is in Spain and Tim is in London, and for them to reconstruct some of the discussions they had. This particular piece is pre-recorded because Pablo is taking his exams for his MA as we speak. Good luck, Pablo. We hope you might be here in time for the questions, but Tim will be here as well.
This is a story about time. The time it takes to tell a story like this. The time it takes for a society to realize there is a problem. Let me paint you a picture. A young child. Mom is a nurse, dad is a doctor. A house in the countryside. A pond in the garden with ducklings to play with. A mischievous boy. Academically extremely promising, but whose mom was frequently called to see the teacher. This was Tim Verity's childhood. I first met Tim back in February in a cafe in Islington, and then again at City University. What initially started as a conversation to arrange an interview for my final university project, it soon developed into a deeper connection of trying to understand some of the most difficult parts of someone's life. Hi, Tim. How are you? I haven't seen you in a while.
Hi, Pablo. Good to see you again.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us and to have, again, this conversation with me. So let's start from the beginning of your story and actually of your life. So how was your childhood? How would you describe it?
Yeah, I had a happy childhood on the most part. Started experiencing some difficulties around the age of around 5 or 6, I guess. We would go to a relative's house at the weekends for a Sunday roast, and the mother of the family would make me sugar mice, which are little sweets that I'd enjoy as sort of after dinner treats. And the adopted son would take me up to his bedroom, and he would use these sweets to encourage me to say naughty things, misbehave, do things that I knew would get me in trouble. And that was to build an environment of trust and reward between us, which he later used to entice me to perform sexual acts on him and to stay quiet about the sexual acts he would perform on me.
And those moments of abuse took place during a few years. But when did you start realizing that what happened to you was actually called abuse?
Yeah, so I had the memories of what happened in some form over most of the course of my life, but it wasn't until I was about 15 or 16 that I really began to understand what the context for them was. And that happened with the rape of a friend who made me realise that event made me realise that what I'd been through was also non-consensual, and it wasn't just a normal part of growing up. And it really began this process of unravelling my mental health and my well-being at the time.
And in those teenage years that you realized that it was abuse, did you start talking to someone else about what happened to you?
Yeah, I did. I began talking out with friends and sharing what I was going through. Because of what happened with that traumatic event, with the rape of a friend, it had a really significant effect on my mental health, and I began to have a breakdown, really. Started experiencing vivid flashbacks, so those memories that I had became waking nightmares, basically. Stopped sleeping properly, and when I did sleep, I would relive the abuse in very vivid detail. And just went from being this, troublemaker, someone who was in trouble quite a lot with, teachers for being grubby and messing around, but a bit of a class clown, got on with most people, was very sociable, and I became withdrawn and just very difficult to be around, really.
It had to be difficult for you, but also for the people around you to try to understand you and help you, actually. And particularly as a man, because, this vision of men and masculinity, that men have to be brave and strong and don't cry. And you can be vulnerable in this society. So as a man, how did abuse affect you?
Yeah, I think everything you said is absolutely right. That was certainly the culture and the environment I was brought up in. And I think this stuff's obviously difficult for anyone who's been through it, but there are challenges that men face particularly that are tied up with those notions around sort of masculinity. And for me, failing to fight off the abuser was a big one for me. You take on a lot of the shame and guilt of the acts of abuse that are perpetrated against you as a survivor. This is something I know survivors go through. And for me to fail to fight off that attacker can feel like you almost let it happen, that you almost deserved it in some way. There's also the issue of involuntary arousal, which I know from conversations with men and women that have been through similar. This is something a lot of people experience. But your body betrays you, and that can lead to some questioning around your sexuality, particularly, I think, for men, particularly when it's a man that's, conducted this stuff, that's perpetrated this abuse. And that led to some questioning of my sexuality in my teens that was quite difficult. That may well have happened anyway, but it certainly added an extra difficulty around those issues.
Hopefully those stereotypes that we mentioned will start disappearing, and thanks also to people like you that speak out openly about what happened, it will improve, hopefully. So your journey continued and you ended going to court. So what did you decide to take that huge step forward into your life?
Yeah, it was a huge step. I'd never been a massive fan of the police. I'd been in trouble with them as well.
Can imagine.
On the streets. So my experiences weren't always the best, but it was talking with my sister when she had her first child, and the realisation that this guy was still out there and still able to potentially harm other children made me sort of reassess that negative perception of what the court case might be like and what dealing with the police might be like. And actually, in reality, all of my fears were unfounded. They handled the case brilliantly and treated the accusations with the due severity that they needed.
And how was the court process like for you? Because probably had to be re-traumatizing to talk again about this to complete strangers.
Yeah, I mean, I told the story on and off, over the years to friends, and it kind of mythologized it in a way. It became this narrative, this story of these events that happened to this character Tim, and that gave a bit of dissociation, a bit of distance for me. But going through the court case was very challenging. I had to go through my memories in a lot more detail than I was comfortable with, and it was like reliving the abuse all over again. But for me, getting up on that court stand, giving my evidence to the court, being able to look at him at the back of the court in the eyes, and that power imbalance was no longer there between us. I could just tell my story, be heard and be believed, and that was more important to me than the conviction. It was the chance for me to get up there and tell my truth. And actually, that process was really revelatory to me. It was the lifting of all of the years of baggage that I've been carrying around were just lifted off my shoulders in that experience.
So now that we can say that that's a chapter closed in your life. So how is your life now? I imagine you'll have up and downs as a normal human being, but how it is now?
Yeah, I mean, it was a massive chapter closing, and a big part of that for me was learning to forgive him for my own sake, so that I could get rid of that baggage and just not. I knew that I would be carrying around for the rest of my life if I didn't, and I'm glad I did. I love my life now. It's not without difficulties, as you say, particularly in these strange COVID times we find ourselves in. But the tools that I've learned and the resilience that I've built over the years in dealing with this stuff, I think has almost been a blessing in some ways, that I can now face the challenges that life inevitably throws my way head on.
I'm glad everything is going well for you, Tim. Thank you so much again for this conversation with me. And it's always a real pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Pleasure to talk to you, Pablo. Thanks.
Although for Tim this is part of his past, the fight against trauma and flashbacks will be forever. Time can almost heal everything, and for each person the length of the acceptance process will be different. Life after child abuse does not mean getting rid of the pain. It means learning to love yourself through the pain.
Thank you to Pablo and Tim for sharing that story. Thank you for the questions that are already coming in the chat. I think Pablo is still taking his exams, but we're lucky enough to have Tim here live with us. And Tim, George Pitcher has put a question to you. How cathartic or therapeutic has it been for you to be involved in this event, or has it been sort of traumatic to do so?
I think one of the things that I've kind of made peace with in life is that things can be both. It can be both traumatic and cathartic. It's less so over time. The more I tell this story, the more I'm open about it, the less traumatic it is. And I think it's part of my wish with this resilience that I built up to be able to tell this story and to be a voice for other people who maybe aren't ready to express how they're feeling and the challenges they face.
And another thing that has been asked in the chat is, like, you talked about forgiveness. Could you unpack that a little more about sort of, what you meant by that?
Yeah, I guess it's a strange word to use. There's a lot of connotations, but I guess it's more of a letting go. Forgiveness is the word I would use because it's the emotional state that seems most close to what I've done. But for me, really, it wasn't for his sake, it was for my benefit to be able to let go of all that anger and shame and guilt and all of those emotions that I've been carrying around for so long, which are so hard to deal with. I made a choice that I wanted to, get rid of that stuff, and part of that process was the court case itself. Getting up there, as I said, telling my story. But it was also a conscious decision of what do I now do with this feeling? What do I do now? And I took a conscious decision that I have to move on now. I have to let it go.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Tim. I just want to say a little bit about sort of both Pablo and Tim. Pablo comes from Spain, but moved to the UK 4 years ago and has just graduated from City. He's a multimedia journalist who specialises in social issues. Tim Verity is a journalist, writer and survivor of childhood sexual abuse who advocates on behalf of other survivors in his spare time. He's currently working on a book and accompanying podcast about his experiences. I think we'd really all like to say very much thank you for this extraordinary story, Pablo and Tim. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Okay, still to come, life and death in the NHS, and how do you define compassionate fashion? But if we were at the theatre, as this event was first thought of, we'd be having an interval now. So we're just going to take a very short break for a couple of minutes so you can put the kettle on, get an ice cream or whatever. We have a soundscape after the break, which we recommend wearing headphones for, so you might want to get those to hand. And plus, it's time for our opinion poll, just for fun. We'd like to know a little bit more about you tonight and your thoughts on journalism. So I'll see you in a moment. Okay, hi, here we are again. I hope you managed the poll and the ice cream. We'll bring you the results in the end at the Virtual News Cafe. Just really briefly, I wanted to tell you about the idea of news on stage as a concept. As journalists, we often get told that we're to blame and no one trusts what we do anymore. And part of the News on Stage project is to see that whether by meeting journalists face to face as human beings, you might trust us a little bit more and understand how we work. Of course, you might trust us less, having met us. Also, with the decline of many newspapers and communities of readers disappearing, we're asking how can we bring those people together again? And finally, could this kind of event be a way of paying for news again, as no one seems to want to do that anymore? So we're doing this as part of a research project here at City, and also my co-researcher, Catherine Adams at Nottingham Trent University. Hi, Catherine. So, still to come, faux fur and seaweed lingerie. But before that, on to the fourth of our fifth performers. Before the break, we saw the reality of what it's like to work in the NHS with Sarah's story of a radiographer. It's easy to criticise how the health service works and what decisions politicians and managers make, but what would you do if you'd been in charge? Our next story is from Amelia Green, who did an in-depth investigation into A&E services in South Wales. Amelia's piece is created as a soundscape, so we recommend wearing headphones to fully appreciate and absorb the sounds you're going to hear.
Okay, so earlier this year, residents of Rhondda and Taff in South Wales found out that their local A&E department was being threatened with closure. The Royal Glamorgan Hospital in South Wales takes in more emergency patients each month than the 2 alternative hospitals nearby. Together, these 3 hospitals see over 120,000 patients each year, more than 10,000 patients a month. When I spoke to the people of this area on why this service means so much to them, they told me stories of sick relatives, broken legs, and drunken mishaps. But none of these stories struck a chord quite like Kate Mantle's. Hers begins with a young boy fighting for his life in the back of an ambulance.
Kate's son Luke suffers with a condition that sometimes leaves him unable to breathe properly. One day when Kate was working in a local school, her parents called as Luke was feeling unwell.
My mother was on the phone and they were basically driving him to the hospital because they couldn't find a pulse.
Luke was being taken to hospital as he wasn't breathing. If the Royal Glamorgan A&E department was closed, Kate would only have 2 options. It's now up to you to decide.
Okay, so if the Royal Glamorgan A&E did close, Kate would only have 2 options to save Luke's life. It would be the University Hospital of Wales in Cardiff or the Prince Charles Hospital in Merthyr Tydfil. So it's up to you to decide. A poll will come up on your screens like the ones that you just did. And there should be, so it's a 40-minute drive to the Prince Charles Hospital and a 20-minute drive to the University Hospital of Wales. So the majority of you are voting for the University Hospital of Wales as its 20-minute drive. Unfortunately, neither of these answers would be correct because without the Royal Glamorgan A&E department, Luke would have died. The hospital is in fact a 5-minute drive for Kate's family. And without that hospital being there, Luke would have lost his life. Luke also suffers with a eating disorder and has used this service on a number of occasions and always needs immediate care.
He was admitted via A&E, stayed in overnight, and you know, I just can't fault the care that we've had since I was pregnant with him all the way through to now. And I think any parent having any child, like I said, they do go down quickly and they bounce back quickly, equally as quickly. But I think with a child like Luke, who has been extremely vulnerable, just having that peace of mind of having the hospital on the doorstep, really, you know, I said you take it for granted, and it's not until it's been threatened with closure that you actually realise, you know, without being dramatic, he might not be there.
Emergency which service? Do you need fire, police or ambulance?
The reasons for closing the A&E department were largely due to staffing problems. Local campaigners stressed that the way in which the NHS in Wales is managed is just simply not working. The Health Board confirmed that this service is short of 10 consultants and its only full-time consultant is leaving. The staffing problems and sheer number of patients has left the service at risk.
They're going into every job thinking this patient could be the corona patient, and are they going to take it home, what they're going to do. And so there's a lot of reassurance needed for all the staff. We're full on the go now, 24 hours a day.
Steve Bennett is the clinical team leader for the Welsh Ambulance Service based in Cardiff. Part of his job is to make sure emergency teams have the right PPE while dealing with coronavirus cases. If the Royal Glamorgan Hospital were to close, Steve's team would be taking on more calls from the surrounding Cardiff areas and need to provide emergency PPE to more teams. This would mean tougher choices and more pressure on other A&E departments. It's now up to you to decide how Steve should manage the increasing calls now that the Royal Glamorgan A&E has closed.
Okay, so we now come to our second poll. So more pressure is being put on Steve's team if the A&E does close. So what I want you to decide is if Steve should be prioritising Cardiff-based calls, which means fast response to local cases, or if he should be prioritising calls from the surrounding areas in South Wales, which will take longer travel times. You can now choose on screen. I think you can already see from this poll that Steve can't win in this situation, as you guys are struggling to make the decision too. In this situation, Steve can't win, and neither do the residents of Rhondda Cynon Taf. Too much pressure would be put on Steve's team in Cardiff if the A&E at the Royal Glamorgan were to close, and this, we can guess, would put lives in danger.
Because from where I work in Blackway, so I work in centre Cardiff, and we cover Craiger, Penturk, where else, Groesfane, and of course, because it's Hensall and sort of the furthest part of the Vale of Glamorgan, we actually run into the Royal Glamorgan. So for us, if they start to close or downgrade the services at the Royal Glamorgan, then we've got to send our crews either down as far as Princess of Wales, which is already struggling with the amount of calls and patients they get, or Prince Charles. Of course, we're taking then ambulance crews out of the capital city, so it's stretching their already stretched emergency services.
Okay, so since producing the original video project that inspired the project that I'm doing now, the Health Board have actually confirmed that the A&E will be staying open. This was after a long fight and campaign by local activists, including Len Arthur, who's going to join us now. I spoke to Len earlier this year at a rally, and he's going to tell us a bit more about how this verdict came about. Thanks for joining us, Len. So what I wanted to ask you, Len, is do you think the pandemic influenced the Health Board's decision to keep this service 24 hours a day? Given that you've been campaigning from January right through to June and right through the lockdown? And if so, or if not, what other factors do you think really made this campaign a success?
There's some interesting questions there wrapped up. First of all, the virus one, it's quite interesting. As the virus started to unfold, we started to realise that it was going to be very difficult to close. Well, in fact, it was another factor that we had to put forward to the Health Board, that they should keep the A&E open, because quite clearly the virus was causing an extra demand on the A&E. It also transpired that the Health Board was experiencing the need, instead of concentrating people on one or two large A&E centres where it was very risky in terms of infection, it would be better if they could keep people more separate. So in a sense, the pandemic started to show the importance of having a local A&E in terms of being able to control infections. In terms of the overall success of the campaign, well, that was clearly and absolutely down to the massive and rapid support from the local community. I've never experienced anything like it. Our Facebook group, a group thing, discussion thing, grew within 7 or 8 days from when we started it to nearly 17,000 people over about 7 days. And people were taking a very, very active interest in what we were doing. So really, it was that uprising, I've called it, of local people, which I think led to political support, and in the end led to the Health Board recognising that it was impossible for them to close the A&E with such huge local community support.
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Len. And I don't think you've given yourself enough credit there, because you were definitely at the heart of this campaign for sure. And thank you from me as well as a resident of Rhondda Cynon Taf. Yeah, thank you very much. What I want to finish by saying is that while you don't all personally know Len or me or Kate Mantle, Everyone can understand what it's like to need your NHS service on the doorstep. And if this pandemic has shown us anything, it's how much we rely on our health service. The last thing this community needed in the middle of the pandemic was to be worrying about the hospital being downgraded to a day service or even just closing altogether. While you aren't familiar with the Royal Glamorgan Hospital personally, all you need to do is replace the name of that service with your own service, and you'll understand the fear that Kate Mantle and everyone else felt here in our little area of Wales. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Amelia and Len, for that. Please type any questions or comments in the chat box for them. I think what is important, and Lindsay Blumell has mentioned it, is the importance of local and community journalism that's come out here. Would you be able to say a little bit about that, Amelia?
Yeah, funny enough, me and Len had a conversation this morning before this, and this is exactly what we were talking about, is the importance of local media, because the area that we're living in is actually now in a local lockdown. So we really need local media to kind of be backing everybody in their experiences. So yeah, definitely. I think that's part of the reason why I did this project for my final degree project, is that it meant a lot to me, and it meant a lot to the people that I know. And having lived in London for 4 years, coming back for lockdown made me realise that there's actually a lot of people here that need people talking about their stories. So yeah, I'm really thankful that Len was part of this today, and just that people know more about what's going on here.
Thank you very much. Let me just tell you a little bit about Amelia. She's just graduated from City and spent the last year working for The Sun as a video producer. Now, she said she's back in Wales. She's looking for opportunities in the Cardiff area. You can find her at Amelia Green 98. Let's just say thank you very much to Amelia and Len. Thank you. The last 6 months of our lives have made us all reassess a lot of things. How we live, who we need to see, what are the absolute essentials. And one of the big changes was a big increase in veganism, as 1 in 5 of us cut down on the amount of meat we ate. But eating vegan and not thinking about the rest of our lifestyle, well, that's very January 2020. Our next piece is by Lucy Freeman, whose original research was about compassionate fashion. And in this piece, she and the actor Leo Hatton reimagine her project as how a star Instagram influencer might tell her social media audience about turning the usual norm of conspicuous consumption upside down.
Hi guys, thank you so much for tuning in with us live today. It's so great to see so many of you with us. As always, we will have a Q&A at the end, so do post your questions in the comment section below. Okay, so I am beyond excited about our guest today, and I know you guys are too. Yes, we have the incredible Lucy Freeman joining us today. For those of you who don't know Lucy, she has been called the anti-influencer. So Lucy has been called the anti-influencer not only for her activism around sustainable fashion, but also for her platform, which encourages people to reconsider their fashion choices and move away from fast fashion culture. Taking the fashion world by storm, Lucy Freeman has amassed 250,000 followers in just 18 months. I know, right? So guys, just quickly before we bring Lucy on, I'd like to share with you a truly staggering fact, which I found out on her platform. Maybe some of you guys saw this too, that here in the UK, we are literally the epicenter for fast fashion in the whole of Europe. I mean, WTF, guys. And also it has been estimated that each person is buying about 27 kg worth of clothing every year and approximately owns 115 items of clothing, with 30% of these never being worn. Another WTF. We really have to sort this out like now, and we have just the person who can help us. Hi, Lucy.
Hi.
Hi, we're so excited to have you on our show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited.
I'd just like to begin by saying how incredible it is that you're using your platform to actually, and I mean this, sort of positively influence a change to help our planet.
Thank you.
So for our viewers who don't know, where did this all begin for you?
So it all happened like really quickly, to be honest. I was just your average influencer. I was keeping up with trends, working with sort of like the biggest brands. And then I started watching some programs on Netflix, and they didn't just tell you about how fast fashion affects our planet, but how it affects the people working in the factories and those living around the factories. And it hit me quite hard. So, well, because fashion is my life. So I took to my Instagram and I asked my followers how many of them knew what compassionate fashion means. And 85% said they didn't. And I realized as an influencer, I'm not doing my job right. I shouldn't be influencing fast fashion all the time.
It's so refreshing to hear someone like you with your influence saying this kind of things. And I think I'm right in saying that you coined the phrase compassionate fashion.
Yes, I did.
And can you just explain to our viewers what compassionate fashion is and what it means to you?
Yes, so to me, compassionate fashion means buying and shopping a bit more sustainably. So that's using sites like Depop, eBay, and then also shopping vegan as well. So it's not just about having a vegan diet, but you can also wear vegan clothes. Leather is a main contributor to toxins in our planet. So this happens through the tanning process. So when you're wearing vegan, you're doing good for the planet and you're harming less animals as well.
That's really good to know. Sorry, excuse me. I guess it means that, you know, we should eat less vegan and eat less meat and wear less leather. You've also sort of shown your followers how we can dress more sort of sustainably and vegan, but I'm right in saying that there's almost sort of this negative association with vegan fashion, right?
Yeah, there is. So with vegan clothing, it seemed in particular that there's a stigma that they're dowdy, unfashionable, and not always the best quality. But many of you don't know that this stunning lingerie set was made from seaweed. And I know that sounds pretty gross, but what you don't know is a lot of our underwear, which is from fast fashion, contributes to 30% of the landfill. Now, this underwear that you put on our skin is full of chemicals, whereas you're paying a bit extra for this beautiful, stunning lingerie set. And although it's made from seaweed, you're putting some very good nutrients onto your skin and into your body. You also wouldn't have known that these shoes are made from apple. There you go. Yeah. So not just apple, but designers are using Pinatex, which is pineapple leaves, mushrooms, and mangoes to make fruit leather. So not only are they vegan, they're also sustainable in combating fruit waste. H&M have released a conscious collection using Pinatex. Hugo Boss have used it, and Chanel have used it to make a hat as well. And I'm kind of sort of like, I've compared this sort of cultural shift in the fashion world to, say, like the mini skirt. Like, it was a big cultural shift back then. Women were able to show their legs off for a change. And it was a lot of good in the world. Like, you could still look good, but have your legs out and there'd be no sort of like problem with it. And then with vegan fashion, it's a huge cultural shift and you can still look great in it.
I love that. It's almost like you're saying that we've got to sort of sex up the vegan fashion trend, you know, like the mini skirt sort of sexed us all up. We've got to sort of sex all this sustainable fashion up. I've also seen on your Instagram that you love to preach about faux fur, and that you showed us this like amazing tip about how to check that we're definitely buying faux fur.
Yes, so I found out that in 2018, both Amazon and TK Maxx were selling real fur products but mislabeling them as faux fur. And I guess because there's such a huge unpopularity nowadays with real fur, that they felt like they had to mislabel it to increase the sales. So I spoke to Sasha Camilli and she gave me some great tips on how to check for faux fur. I've got my jacket here. The first one to do is to check the back. So as you can see, or as I can see, my faux fur has been sewed onto the back. If it was real fur, it would feel like skin and it wouldn't be glued or sewed on. The second one to do is to check the hairs. So with real fur, they are usually tapered towards the end. Unless they've been cut, then they would be blunt. But usually fake fur isn't tapered towards the end. And the last one, which is best not to do in a shop or in your home, maybe outside in the garden, to get a lighter and light one of the hairs. If it smells like burning hair, then it's going to be real fur, but if it smells like burning plastic, then it's fake fur.
Wow, thank you so much. I mean, that's insane. I can't believe those companies were trying to do that. I mean, I can't even get my head around why that was happening. I can't wait to try the seaweed lingerie and get all those lovely nutrients on my skin. I might not be going into TK Maxx and setting fire to their faux fur or their real fur, but thank you so much, Lucy, for joining us today. And we're loving your Instagram, as you can see on our screens right now. And we're loving all the work that you're doing. It's just so inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now we're going to go to our viewers for a Q&A where you guys get to ask Lucy yourself the questions I'm sure you've been dying to ask her.
Thank you so much to Leo and Lucy for performing that piece. And yes, there are a lot of questions coming in on this. Lucy, like sort of, the one question is like sort of, has working on this project really sort of changed the way that you buy and wear fashion, do you think?
Yeah, so I haven't bought any leather products in a long time. The leather products I do have are things that I bought from a long time ago, and they are durable, they've lasted a long time, and I don't see any need to replace them or buy anything new. I would never ever buy real fur. Like, after watching a lot of sort of like videos from Peter, I wouldn't. And I shop a lot more in like charity shops. Like, it's so like amazing, all the things that you can find in there that you don't need to go to a fast fashion shop, just buy second hand. Like, it's almost as good as new a lot of the time.
But like, so someone else is asking, are fashion designers just using this as a trend? Is this just another kind of fad from fashion? And someone else has said, you know, isn't this making sort of someone who's not so keen on fashion, making something worthless more sustainable? Is this sort of a problem with the fashion industry as a whole?
Well, I'd hope it's not just fashion designers aren't doing it just because it's a trend. There are some designers who have the morals behind them from the beginnings, like much like Stella McCartney. She's had the morals from years and years ago, and she's released so many collections that are vegan and sustainable, and hopefully there should be other designers following in that footsteps. Look out for any new and upcoming designers. They won't be doing it just for the trend. If they're starting from there from the beginning, then it's their morals. And I know there are a lot of shops that are doing conscious collections. They're not exactly, I would say they're sustainable, but they're not sort of ethical, because there's a lot of ethics they're not following. But fingers crossed that they're going in the right direction, and hopefully one day we'll get there.
Thank you. And Leo, it's good to introduce you as like sort of our director of performance tonight, and you've worked with all our journalists here. How did you work with Lucy on this piece? What was the idea behind it?
Well, we saw your, how did we come about? So we saw your sort of piece that you'd done for your dissertation. And I guess I just thought that it would be a really good idea to sort of maybe look at how people are using these platforms to influence, and actually maybe we could turn Lucy into this influencer, which actually Glenda, you came up with the idea of the anti-influencer, which I really like. About, you know, you see a lot of influencers encouraging people to shop more, to buy more, to consume more. And I guess we thought it'd be a really nice way to sort of reframe how Instagram could be used to encourage people to maybe not consume, but to be more conscious. And I think Lucy quite liked that idea, and so we sort of took it from there. I have a question for you, Lucy, actually, about whether you said you would never buy real fur, but would you buy vintage fur? You know, would you buy fur that's already been made into a coat in a charity shop that would otherwise go to waste?
I wouldn't necessarily buy it and wear it, just because I'd feel very uncomfortable in it, knowing that was an animal. But I understand that if someone's wearing it, it's vintage, that in a way that is sustainable. So yes, it's not so much as a huge problem.
Yeah.
But also I feel like you're not also sending the right message. If you're wearing it now, then you might be sending the message to people that, oh, it's okay to still wear it and kill animals. But there's lots of different sort of like morals behind it, and I personally wouldn't, just because I'd feel a bit uncomfortable in it.
That's good to know.
Great. Thank you. Well, You can meet Leo and Lucy and all the journalists in our virtual news cafe afterwards to chat more about their work and some of the themes that may emerge from this. Let me just tell you briefly a little bit about Lucy and Leo. Lucy Freeman is a multimedia journalist who loves all things colourful, cosmo and fashion. She's a love for living by the seaside, but also enjoys the buzz of city life. Leo Hatton has worked with Punchdrunk and the directors Shekhar Kapoor and Wes Anderson, and her screen credits include ITV, Sky One and TNT. Let's say thank you to Leo and Lucy. Thank you very much. So that concludes the formal part of the show. We're really grateful to City University for putting on this webinar, and in particular to Matt Drew from events and from the events team, and Dr. Paul Lashmar for giving it the go-ahead. We're super grateful to Leo Hatton for her tireless work as theatre director, and we're grateful to the performers for all their time and creativity they've put into telling their stories this way. Thanks also to Ben Cook, our website and tech consultant, who's been tirelessly posting on the chat all the info you needed to know. Also thanks to my News on Stage research partner, Catherine Adams. If you want to know more about News on Stage or would be interested in being part of the future event, please get in touch via my email, which should be on the events page, or via our website on Twitter. But finally, we're so grateful to you, the audience, for taking part. All the cast and crew will be available in the virtual news cafe if you want to continue the discussion and see the results of the poll. For those who want a coffee or a drink, it's very cheap and there's no queues and no curfew. Just remain in this meeting now and we hope to see you there. Okay, so we're back. Welcome to the virtual news cafe. Hardly anyone queuing at the moment, and the price is really cheap. I mean, supermarket cheap. Do we have the results of the poll we did earlier? Matt, do we have them to hand to see if we can say anything? Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about who you've been here. So most people, 89%, were watching alone. Most of you watched the BBC, 71%. The next one was a joint 11% for ITV and Channel 4 News. Sky and CNN on 4%. No one watches Russia Today. Most of you had a passion for journalism or journalism and the theatre. Now, let's see, is the media to blame for most things? 89% of you say partly. This is why we want things like News on Stage. Would you prefer watching this live in the theatre or online? I think this is very typical of what's been happening this week. 82% of you would rather be in a theatre. And finally, do you often go to see live performances? Most of you go once a year or slightly less once a month. Do you think journalism should be campaigning? 100% of you. Should journalists help people in the story you're covering? 79% of you. Do you know any journalists? 43% of you know some. Only 4% of you know none. So that tells us a little bit about who you are, and hopefully that tells you a little bit about yourself as well. So I'd like to welcome back all our performers and journalists, Helen, Lucy, Amelia, Tim, Sarah, and Natalie. I think Pablo is still doing his exams. Welcome also to Leo, our theatrical director, and as I say, Catherine, who's been working on News on Stage as part of this joint research project. So Catherine can answer questions about the wider project and thoughts for the future. So now you might have something to add to one of those stories from your own experiences, or you may have seen themes emerge from these 5 stories. But can I just begin by asking the journalists here. Journalists, what was that experience like for you? You've never told your stories to a live audience before. Anyone like to say what it was like for them? Tim, yes.
Yeah, go on then. Less nerve-wracking than I was expecting.
That's good to know.
It probably helps that I'm sat at home, but there was a little bit of, jitters came up just before I went on.
Great. Anyone else likes to echo Tim, or actually would rather not have ever been in this position, but got their arm twisted by me?
I'd say that it was great to actually be able to talk about something that I've already reported on, but that is a local story, like we were talking on the chat about, and to what is going to be predominantly students studying in London who maybe don't know about this area of Wales that I was reporting on. I'm glad that kind of local stories were welcomed on this project. I wasn't sure if that would be all right, and it's worked so well. So yeah, I love that.
I think part of what came out from your piece, Amelia, was quite how important, sort of local stories and campaigning journalism at a local level have been. Now, I think I saw someone raise their hand, like sort of earlier to, yes, sort of George Pitcher. George, would you like to, can I allow you to talk, so to speak, I think, and would you like to ask your question, please?
Unmute. Am I unmuted? Yes, hi.
You are unmuted.
Congratulations, everyone. 5 fabulous performances. You were all really good without exception, and I really enjoyed it. I really got engrossed in the narrative and the story, and such a range of stories too. I just wanted really to turn that comment that Tim made about finding it nerve-wracking around, and indeed turn around Glenda's question as to how nerve-wracking it was for you guys, and to ask the question, would you, I mean, I'm turning around Glenda's question about, that was in the poll, about would we rather be in theatre or online, I guess, and ask you, would you rather perform like this down the line, as we say, or would you rather perform live on stage in a theatre? And attached to that, I suppose, I'm asking, would you find one of those much more demanding and nerve-wracking than the other? Is it weird performing to a kind of technological eye on a laptop?
Who'd like to answer that? Okay, Helen, yeah, please do.
Hi, I'm a bit nervous at both prospects, actually. I was quite nervous at this one, to be honest. I don't know if I'd find it very different, because the quality's got to be the same, hasn't it? You've still got to translate something to the audience, and obviously the tools are different when you have an online setting as well as an in-person one, but this experience was quite good. For me personally, I can only speak for myself. When I did my dissertation project, which was this topic, space debris, I was in the middle of coronavirus lockdown, so I couldn't go out to interview anybody. I couldn't go in space, unfortunately, and film anything. So I had to use all the sort of, I guess, copyrighted material or sort of stock material that I could, and footage, and make something very similar to this. It was a multimedia project, but I had to just use what I could and the basics that I could, and it ended up being something that I'm really proud of. And then this project, or this performance, was just another addition on that. It was another way to challenge myself to approach the topic of space and do it on Zoom. I don't know if a lot of people can say that, and just try and use different methods and different tools to really translate that over to you guys, which I hope I did.
Thank you, Helen. Like, sort of, does anyone have anything else to add of our, like, sort of, our journalists? Yeah, Leo, would you like to?
I mean, I would be when I first saw Glenda and Catherine post about this project way back at the beginning of this year, before we knew that there was going to be a pandemic or any of that happened, I was very excited, coming from the, from the arts and from a bit of stage background. I was very excited to see news on stage in the sort of, end on piece. And I think it would be just very different. I think this actually works very, very well. And I really love what we've created, what Glenda's created here and what Catherine created last time. And it's a completely different vision that I'm sure that they both had, but actually it lends itself really well to this medium. That being said, when it is possible, if it is possible next year to do something like this on stage, I think it would be very interesting and very different, because being live in the room with people does really change the energy. And I would just be interested to see what happens to sort of news in that context, and what could be done you know, differently, because we're limited, you know, we're limited to sort of Zoom and technology, and you know, that's a limitation which does provide some creativity, but then the stage itself has other limitations. So I think that's my answer.
Brilliant. Oh, Catherine, did you want to jump in there?
Yes, well, it was just to follow that up. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. I noticed a question there about what our plans are for the future, so I thought I might hop in and try and answer that as well. And I think we both really want, Glenda and I both really want to try out as many different shows and venues and permutations as we can. But that's all depends on whether we get any research grants or funding, of course, or whether this develops into, you know, a wider project. It's at quite an early stage, but we've definitely been invited to stage something at the Byline Festival next summer. It was going to be this summer, but I envisage this being it can be on Zoom, but it could also be on a very small scale, a tent at a festival, or a roundup of the events in the magistrates' court in a, you know, almost on the steps of the courtroom sort of thing. So this project's all about exploring different ways of bringing news directly to people. Yeah.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you. Now, Mel Bunce has got a question, I think.
I do, yeah. No, thank you all so much. I really enjoyed that, and it was wonderful to see some of the students that I know very well performing their stories. So congratulations, everyone. I just have a question about whether you think some types of journalism are better suited than others for this kind of a performance, either on stage or on a kind of Zoom stage. And I guess one of the things that I wonder about the most within that question, you kind of calling your group, I think, news on stage, and news obviously implies a certain kind of timeliness and you know, immediacy. Do you think there's a kind of a natural lag, I suppose, if you're going to perform? Does that lend it better to feature stories or particular types of stories, or just keen to hear your thoughts on that?
I guess like I might hand over to Catherine, because I think everyone's heard sort of enough from me tonight, but that's not me trying to dodge the question. I mean, I think what was interesting for me about doing this event is we were obviously sort of our great graduates were all doing stuff that they had done in their projects, which were sort of long-term work that they'd looked at really in depth. But what surprised me was the kind of the sheer like sort of diversity of stories that they did. And I think yes, it may be that sort of features does lend itself to it, but I think both Catherine and I have thought very much about this should be a medium for like telling stories for the first time. You'd come to hear something that wasn't heard. So whether it was on the, as she was saying, descend the steps of the magistrates' court, you know, sort of doing something around court reporting, or, you know, something that could be much more newsy, or sort of breaking exclusives. I think that's the kind of thing that we're looking to explore. What would you say, Catherine? Would you add anything to that?
Sorry if I missed the entirety of your question. I was trying to answer Ben's question on the chat at the same time. But what I heard was that, you know, what kinds of stories lend themselves best, or are there some that don't? And I was really surprised by the range of stories you could tell using this method, because we had something, you know, one about fashion and one about sex abuse in the same program, and in the earlier performance that we did, the earlier show we did in July called Unrelated Stories, we had something about the Holocaust, and then we nearly had one about Dracula's daughter. It didn't happen in the end, but it will one day. So yeah, you can do any story. I think you can use so many different methods of telling it, and sometimes it's very powerful to have that intimate, immersive, eyeballing monologue, and you know, in other times it's great to have that audio-visual sort of mosaic that like Amelia produced tonight. So I think it's very versatile. Yeah, interesting. We're exploring it still, aren't we?
And I can see that Richard Evans has his hand up. Richard, have you got a question for us?
Yes, I was just going to say, you know, congratulations to everyone, and what a great experience it is, experiencing live performance again and finding out so much about the stories. So my question was about, you know, how true, to ask the journalists, how true the performances were to the stories that you found out, and whether you thought about, you know, dramatizing elements of it, you know, that docudrama format that does really well on TV, and whether how you'd feel about that if stuff had been written in that that wasn't there, whether that was something you'd considered.
Yeah, I think an absolutely sort of crucial question here, which I think it'd be great to hear from all our journalists on that. Who would like to go first before I sort of start picking on people? Maybe like sort of actually, Helen, would you like to go?
Go on, then I'll go first. I mean, Richard knows me and all the fellow graduates know me. I'm pretty sure that I don't have the guts to talk to the people like that usually, the way I presented the topic. But I mean, it was true what I said, the facts and the figures, and that really is for the journalism element of it. There's obviously elements where you can add some flair, but the truth of the story still remains untouched. For me, I mean, the way that the performance, on the purpose of the performance, yes, was supposed to get you thinking about space debris and the impacts of it. But I don't expect everyone to go out with a titanium helmet now, anytime they leave the house, you know what I mean? So it's just to really highlight the issue, because, I mean, again, from personal reasons, that we hear so much about space explorations and how good what Elon Musk's next task is and so on, and we think about these steps and how good they are, but we don't really think about the footprints we're leaving behind. And space debris is a big indicator of that we are making these great strides, sure, and they're good for explorations of where we're going to move on to next planet wise, but for future generations we're cluttering the exit route, aren't we? So that was really where I was coming from, and I guess the dramatized elements of that performance were really trying to highlight that message.
Thank you, Helen. I was actually thinking, Sarah, your piece was in some ways one of the most classically dramatized way. We took your original long form feature and kind of stripped it back to the what your interviewee had said. How did you, watching Natalie perform it, sort of how did you find that as an experience? Did you feel that it was true that we'd managed to tell the story of the radiographer in a sort of different way, but similar to how you'd done in your original feature?
I think absolutely it felt very true to the original experience. I think what this entire event has shown is that the way that we define journalism needs to be changed and needs to be broadened. And so things like narrative long form journalism is just as much journalism as data driven journalism, and immersive is just as much the same. And getting these kind of one-on-one stories with a radiographer, for example, it just feels like you are in that moment with them. And I think that's a very interesting way to get your news, because you're not just hearing stats and you're not just getting figures, but you're actually talking in a way to someone who knows exactly what they're talking about and has experienced it.
Thank you, Sarah. Lucy or Amelia, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
I was just going to say that I think if, like, for a project like this, obviously you're picking stories in advance that you want to talk about. It's not so much kind of breaking news, it's going to be long form kind of feature type style stories. Mine not really being included in that. Obviously I wanted to do it because I did a project on it earlier this year. But I think when you do a feature or a long form story, you're picking something that you're so passionate about and you're so interested in, that for something like this, you're going to kind of dramatize it anyway because you yourself feel so passionately about the story. So whether it's an actor or you yourself just presenting it like I did, it's probably going to come across really well how big a deal this issue is or how big the story is, because as long as the person actually organizing the story, preparing the story, really cares about what they're saying, it's probably going to get across how vital this issue is. Even with something like Lucy's story, like the fashion story, that was so fun, such a fun way of doing it, but you could really tell that it was something that she knew so much about. It was something that she's very interested in. That really came across, and you felt like you could trust her and the information she was telling you because she cared so much about what she was talking about. So I think, yeah, I think dramatizing it kind of helps, but also isn't necessarily something that you have to do in something like this, because as long as you yourself are sort of an expert or know a lot about what you're talking about, then it's going to get across, I think, to everybody how important the issue is, or kind of, yeah.
Great. Lucy, is there anything that you'd like to say?
Yeah, I agree with Amelia. Like, each story is so different as well. Like, you're never going to have one that's exactly the same to the other. So the way you dramatize it is literally down to your story, and that's why tonight all of ours was so different. We all had different elements, and that's why I chose to be like an influencer. Like, I felt like that fit my story very well. And although there are some sort of like eco sort of influencers and vegan influencers, I find that a lot of people don't know about them, so I felt like that character best portrayed the story to get sort of like the message out.
I think what I'd like to add to what you've all said, apart from the fact that I think we did have a lot of discussions with all the journalists about the facts came first in the story, like sort of that this had to be journalistically rigorous. But the other element is this part of it. It's about journalists presenting their work in a live environment that, you know, has to be online, not in a kind of performance space. But in terms of trust and like sort of building that relationship between the audience, it's as well as like sort of Lucy being the influencer or Helen being the professor, Amelia like sort of creating her soundscape, or, you know, Sarah's monologue. It's about the fact that you, the audience, can talk to the journalists, see them in a way that we don't always see journalists because we're behind a screen or behind a TV package. And you can ask them questions afterwards about, you know, why is space law so important? Why do we need to care about South Wales hospitals? And that's why it was important, I think, to have Tim here, because it's very unusual to see. We've seen journalists do pre-recorded stories and watched very powerful stories. And what was interesting, why Pablo and Tim did what they did, was so that we could see that interview in motion, and, you know, be able to talk to Tim afterwards about what he felt about it. And as I say, good luck, Pablo. I really hope that exam is going well as we speak. He was doing it at 7:30, I think. So back in Madrid. But you would have been able to ask him as well about why did he choose this subject? How had he approached the idea of interviewing Tim? And that's something that, as we were saying earlier, with the lack of sort of local journalism, means that we don't have that close relationship with journalists as often. I'm trying to look sort of at the sort of participants list. Is there anyone's hand up who wants to ask a question that I've missed? Please do ask that now. And if anyone has got what I believe is called a legacy hand up, that's already asked a question, I'm just presuming that you've already asked one and don't want to ask another one, please speak now. Is there anyone else who's waiting to ask a question? No, I don't think so. And in fact, I'm looking at like sort of the clock and the sort of the witching hour. We may not be sort of subject to the same curfews as has been imposed this week, but I'm conscious that we're going past the time that we were allotted. So I think we probably need to bring this to a close. I want to say again, a big thank you to the performance and the crew, and also you, the audience, as well. The cafe, the Virtual News Cafe, will be closing now, but you can continue to talk to us via the website and follow us on social media. We'll also be sending you a survey tomorrow, a very quick one, 10 questions via SurveyMonkey, to find out a little bit more. If anyone would like to fund our project, it's currently unfunded, but please feel free to do that. And we hope that you can come to the next News on Stage event that we do. As I say, hopefully we'll be at the Byline Festival the next time that can run in real life with some more exclusive stories to you. So thank you to everyone, cast and crew, but mainly you, the audience. Thank you. And goodbye. Bye-bye.
Well done.